Mars just for that reason. But in 1997, Pathfinder touches down on the surface of Mars, and what are they looking for? Microbes and water, anything that could be the building blocks of life so that life could... We have to find life out there. What's really strange about it is that we spend billions and billions of dollars on this stuff, and we already know, scientifically proven, that it is utterly impossible for life to come into being by itself. Life does not come from non-life. Now, we used to believe that. We used to believe that life just came, because people would put a fresh piece of meat outside, and 2 days later, what would they find in the meat? Maggots. They say, look at that, dead meat gives birth to maggots. We actually believed that for years and years and years. In 1668, this guy by the name of Francesco Redi said, that is not what's happening. Francesco Redi in 1668 takes a piece of meat, puts it in a jar, seals it, takes another piece of meat, puts it in an open jar, and leaves it out in the sun, waits a couple of days, and guess what happens? The open meat has maggots. Sorry, you didn't know this is what we'd be talking about tonight. The open meat has maggots, and the closed meat does not. It says, see, meat does not give birth to maggots. Flies give birth to maggots in the meat. For 200 years, nobody believes it. Nobody believes it. So, Louis Pasteur comes along 200 years later, and Louis Pasteur settles it. He puts some broth, some soup in a jar, and seals it, cooks it, seals it, and lets it go. And you know, that soup, that broth, never gets any bacteria, never gets any mold. What did he develop? Pasteurization. We still pasteurize our milk as a result of his studies and his experiments. Louis Pasteur proved beyond the shadow of a doubt, life does not come from non-life. Rocks do not give birth to life. Dust does not give birth to life. It's been proven beyond the shadow of a doubt. But still they're hoping. Because in order to have a world without God, you now have to have life come into being by itself. It can't be scientifically impossible. So in 1953, a guy by the name of Stanley Miller does an experiment known as the Miller-Urey experiment. And what he does, he takes a bunch of chemicals, methane, water, ammonia, hydrogen, and so on. He said that was the atmosphere of the ancient Earth. And if lightning went through that, it might just start life. So he takes all those chemicals and bang, he sends electricity through it over and over and over again, hoping to get life. You know what he found at the bottom of the tank? Amino acids. Well, that's one of the building blocks of life, so they got all excited. Mystery solved. Not quite. There's one really big problem, besides the fact that we really don't know what Earth's early atmosphere was like, and we don't know that it had ammonia, methane, and so on. Amino acids aren't life. In order to have life, you have to have protein, and you have to hook all those amino acids together to make those proteins, and that doesn't happen all by itself. Now, I'm not a cellular biologist, but here's what I do know. Inside your cells, there's a little machine, that's the way I like to describe it. A little machine gathers up all the amino acids, but before it even does that, it goes to the nucleus of the cell, checks the library. I don't think there's enough information there for 30 million copies of Encyclopedia Britannica. That machine looks at how do I make a protein. Then it goes out and it takes amino acids and it links them all together and makes the protein. Then the protein goes out, and if it's right, it folds up into something that's useful. If it's wrong, it just falls apart. It folds it up, and another machine takes that protein and brings it to the part of the cell where it's needed most and tells it what to do. So, that's what you need to make proteins. Stanley Miller found amino acids in the jar, one of the building blocks of life, in the bottom of his tank. Who is going to tell those amino acids how to link up and become the first protein? You still need somebody or something to start it all, and themselves to admit that because of what it means. Dr. George Wald, the Nobel Prize-winning scientist, said this. This is revealing. There are only two possible explanations as to how life arose. Spontaneous generation arising to evolution, in other words, life came into being by itself, or a supernatural creative act of God. Those are the only two possibilities, accident or God. Spontaneous generation was scientifically disproved 120 years ago by Louis Pasteur and the others, but that leaves us with only one other possibility. That life came as a supernatural act of creation by God. Now follow me carefully. But I can't accept that philosophy because I do not want to believe in God. Therefore, I choose to believe in that which I know is scientifically impossible, spontaneous generation leading to evolution. That's what's going on. The accidental beginning of life on Earth isn't good science. It's a deliberate act of belief. And I find it fascinating that in the pages of the Bible, 2 Peter 3, it predicted this. There would come a day, for this they willfully forget, that by the word of God the heavens were of old. There's a prophecy in the Bible that actually said there would come a day when people would have to close their eyes to the evidence to believe there is no God. That's the moment we're now living in. Somebody or something set this place in motion. And he still does things in people's lives that science just doesn't always explain. Who started it? That's a pretty good question.